Hey, what's up? This is Dr. Taylor Crick, host of the AutoImmune Doc podcast. And on this YouTube channel, I share reviews of papers in the peer-reviewed medical literature that have to do with topics that I find interesting, or a lot of them are topics that we talk about on the podcast, or things that I just think are really, really important. Today's is really cool. It's interesting. I found it. I was not looking for this, but this study kind of popped up and the title intrigued me, and it was like, oh, I got to read this. It's new. It's published in 2021, I believe. It's in Nature Biofilms and Microbiome, so one of the Nature offshoot journals. And it says daily full spectrum light exposure prevents food allergy like allergic diarrhea by modulating vitamin D and the microbiome. So that's really, really interesting. But again, the title caught my eye more than anything. So let me give a little background here. What this is saying is daily full spectrum light exposure. What that means is that the sun is full spectrum. Our ancestors have always, been around full spectrum light exposure. That means from infrared on the 700s, 800s, upper 600s, 700, that's on the infrared side, to ultraviolet, which is more in the 400s as numbers get lower. And so the full spectrum. So every time that you're out in the sun, there's a varying degree of that spectrum. If you're at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to get more UV wavelengths versus early morning versus late evening. There's more infrared A, there's more different changes of these things as we get full wavelengths. But what happens with our lights is they're not full wavelength. Incandescent lights are, which is why they're not energy efficient. It costs a lot of money and electricity to power a full wavelength, whereas an LED can be a more narrow wavelength that's very economical because we don't have to, provide the power for that. So anyway, that's really, 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 really interesting. But what has happened in the last 125, 130 years or so, not very many, we have spent our days under artificial light. We spend them looking at computers, we spend them looking at devices, looking at TVs under artificial light. And so there's this whole growing field of light exposure and photobiomodulation and phototherapy and circadian rhythms and things like that, because our bodies respond to different wavelengths of light in different ways. Like blue light is well known to shut down melatonin production. Blue light from our lights, from our devices, whereas red light and infrared wavelengths at 660 and different wavelengths are shown to do things to our mitochondria, like speed up things like cytochrome C oxidase and ATPase, and they've got these cellular functions, these individual wavelengths of light. But in general, it's like individual B vitamins, like B9 has a role, B12 has a role, but the way they're presented in nature is a combo, or is a complex full spectrum. So anyway, I digress, but that's why this is really interesting. In our rise of modern chronic inflammatory diseases that have not been around forever, but only very recently in our lineage, one of the things that correlates with this is the loss of sun exposure. So anyway, this paper is really, 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 really fascinating. And there are people out there like Jack Cruz who have been saying this for some time, that light exposure impacts hormones, light exposure impacts neurotransmitters, light exposure impacts our microbiome, light exposure impacts our cellular functions, our circadian rhythms, which over a third of our genome is controlled by cellular mechanisms. So it's not just about waking and sleeping, it's about everything else. And there's other papers that I have on this channel about how clock disruption can promote allergy and different things like that. So anyway, let's read this. The importance of sun exposure on human health is well recognized. If anybody contradicts that, then to me they're smoking crack, because it's like we've been exposed to the sun forever. and the incidence of skin cancers and things like that, the correlation is just not there. Yes, if you burn your skin, it causes oxidative stress, and yes, oxidative stress is associated with cancer, but the association of sun on skin causing cancer doesn't match up in all the large scale studies all the time. And a recent trend of avoiding sun exposure has led to the risk of missing the beneficial effects such as vitamin D. Vitamin D is one of the factors for development of food allergies, and vitamin D status controls gut homeostasis by modulating the microbiome. This study, they used mice and they put them under full spectrum light therapy, and phototherapy ameliorated. That means that it got rid of. It ameliorated allergic diarrhea and improved food allergy associated vitamin D3 insufficiency and dysbiosis. So let's look into that. So food allergies, common in children and adults, and the prevalence of food allergies has increased dramatically in the past few decades. So I see this all the time. I see it in kids, I see it in infants, I certainly see it in adults, but there's a difference in allergy and sensitivity, and that's not for today, but it's a big deal. There's several theories, the changes in our food system, the hygiene hypothesis, epigenetics, low vitamin D levels. Epidemiological evidence has shown that low vitamin D levels in infancy appear to be a risk factor for developing food allergies. And it says in our previous study, this group, has demonstrated that the reduced expression of vitamin D3 in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and then exposure to full spectrum light and D3 supplements ameliorated non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in rats. So that's kind of cool too. Some other studies that this group is doing with the full spectrum light exposure. You know, what's been said by Cruz and others is that like every rat and mouse study that's ever been done has been done in a lab under artificial lights. And if those artificial lights skew physiology, those artificial lights can skew the results. This has been known since the 70s. The guy who came up with this, John Ott, his book is one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. He was a layperson, a videographer for Disney, who did time-lapse photography of like plants budding and stuff. And he noticed that when he put them in different cases, whether they were glass or plastic or pink or blue, it affected the way that they grew. And he became an academic researcher, and then he started noticing the same thing with rats and mice, is that depending on where they were at in the lab, you know, their light exposure is going to be different, and it's going to change their physiology. So anyway, it's really, really interesting. So some of the things that they did, basically they gave these rats food allergies, or mice rather. They gave them food allergies and they got diarrhea. And they talk about all of this. They talk about how they measured it. They talked about what they found. So immunoglobulin production. So the phototherapy actually phototherapy suppressed IgE and IgG1 levels, which is allergy, but slightly induced total IgG2 expression after the challenge, resulting in the amelioration of food allergy like allergic diarrhea by daily phototherapy during this sensitization. The other things that they do, you know, I'm not going to get into all this. They measure the immune challenges, the immune changes. They raised the vitamin D levels. It ameliorated food allergies. It raised the vitamin D levels, and it changed the microbiome in these mice. And then what they did is they did a fecal microbial transplant where they took the microbiome from one mouse and put it in another mouse. And they found that when they took the microbiome from one mouse and put it in the other mouse, it caused similar dysbiosis, but it did not impact the vitamin D levels, which of course would make sense. Yeah, and so that's what they're going through here, is that this is how many times they challenge them with allergies. So the phototherapy group, they got like a little bit more resilience, and then when they were challenged with an allergen. So imagine if this were pollen, and if you have a pollen allergy and I throw pollen in your face, it's like boom, it only takes 2 times and you get symptoms. In this case, it was diarrhea. But if we challenge you 5 times and on the 6th one you get a symptom, your resilience is higher. And that's what they were doing. Is this group is the phototherapy group. These are the healthy normal controls. These are the food allergy groups. Um, Da, 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 da. These are some of the challenges. These are some of the changes that were significantly. This is the total IgE, total IgG1, total IgG2. These are some of the changes in some of the epithelial cytokines, IL-25, IL-33. That's actually how I found this paper. I was looking up things with biofilms and IL-25 and IL-33, and this paper came up. It was like, that was 30 minutes ago, and I got distracted. TSLPs, I think I already said that. But yeah, anyway, I think that's the takeaway. I don't think there's anything else that I need to say. I'm not suggesting that you're a mouse and that this is going to ameliorate your food allergies, but the science is coming out about this more and more and more. I'm seeing if there's anything else, so I'm scrolling still. But the science is coming out more and more and more about the importance of light exposure and light wavelength and of full spectrum light wavelengths. They reference another study in this paper where they say that narrow spectrum UVB has been shown to change the microbiota, but they're just starting to do these studies. But what we're going to find is that different wavelengths have certain effects, but full spectrum is the way that we've always been designed, the way that we've always evolved, and the way that our ancestors lived, and the way that God kind of put us on the earth with the sun to kind of work together. And we know how to use those wavelengths. We don't know how to use unnatural, broad, narrow spectrum wavelengths. So that's kind of my takeaway of this, is that if you have allergies, if you have chronic disease, first off, again, this showed that it changed things with the microbiome and it changed things with vitamin D. And let me go to the results again, because now I'm kind of digressing. Let's go down here. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I mean, let's just leave it at that. That the results were that it ameliorated phototherapy ameliorated the diarrhea and improved the vitamin D3 insufficiency and changed the microbiome, improved the dysbiosis. So just by giving them exposure to certain light wavelengths, it started making changes in their gut, which is not that surprising to me. But when we start seeing it come out in the literature, I got excited about this and wanted to do a quick video about this paper.